Hi everyone and welcome to the third part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote: to become good at anything, you have to know how to apply basic principles. To become great at it, you have to know when to violate those principles. Some food for thought coming from Garry Kasparov. Now, a brief review of the second part where we discussed the concept of being ahead in development as an ideal to be aimed at, and then went through the two scenarios given by Nimzowitsch when to go for exchanges, of which the first was an exchange with gain of tempo, and the second being liquidation to gain time. And just to let you know that a link to Leach's studies can be found in the video description of each video in this series, as in this video. I create these studies to assist me in recording the videos, and I just thought you might find them helpful for the sake of better understanding yourself. So now, moving further into the book, Nimzowitsch gives an example of a wrong, unmotivated or purposeless exchange where we have e4, e5, d4, the center game, e takes on d4 and c3, the Danish gambit, and now bishop c5, on which Nimzowitsch comments, curious that this move, which must devour a tempo, should be the beginner's first or second thought. He may consider d takes on c3 here, but having perhaps heard somewhere that one ought not to go pawn hunting in the opening, rejects it in favor of bishop c5. The continuation, a sad one for black, will be c takes on d4, bishop b4 check, moving the bishop for the second time, bishop d2 and bishop takes on d2 check, unfortunately forced, otherwise black will lose more tempi. Knight takes on d2 with an advantage of 3 tempi to white. The mistake lay in bishop c5, but after c takes on d4, bishop b6 would at any rate have been better than bishop b4 check, which only led to a disadvantageous exchange. Moving further, Nimzowitsch discusses about the center and its demobilizing force. Some examples as to when and how the advance of the enemy center is to be met. On the maintenance and surrender of the center, he writes, as we have already noticed, a free mobile center is a deadly weapon of attack, since the advance of the center pawns threatens to drive back the enemy pieces. In every case, the question is whether the hunted knight, losing all control over himself, will have to flit aimlessly from pillar to post, or whether he will succeed in saving himself or the tempi for which he is responsible. Nimzowitsch gives an example to explain this case, where we have e4, e5, d4 and e takes on d4, where Nimzowitsch writes, the white king's pawn or e-pawn is ready to march and is only waiting for an enemy knight to show himself on f6 to put him speedily to flight. c3, knight f6, black lets what will happen, and this is what every beginner should do in order to gain experience of the consequences of an advance in the center. e5 and knight e4. The knight can maintain himself here, for bishop d3 will be answered by a developing move of full value, namely d5, and not of course a further wandering by knight c5 here, because this move after c takes on d4, knight takes on d3 check, and queen takes on d3 would yield an advantage of 4 tempi to white. On the other hand, after e4, e5, d4, e takes on d4, c3, knight f6, and e5, it would not be advantageous to move the knight to d5, for the poor fellow would not find repose or comfort here because of queen takes on d4, and not bishop c4 because of knight b6, and the bishop in his turn will have to lose a tempo. So queen takes on d4, c6, bishop c4 now, knight b6, and knight f3. White has here 6 tempi as against 2 or 1.5 to black, for the knight is not better placed at b6 than at f6, and the pawn at c6 is really not a whole tempo, since no move of a central pawn is here in question. Nimzowitsch gives another illustration to explain the same case of a hunted knight, where we have e4, e5, f4, e takes on f4, a move described as a loss of time for black by Nimzowitsch, knight f3, knight f6, and e5, attacking the knight. Nimzowitsch writes, and again we have the same problem. Knight e4 would not spell maintenance or comfort for the knight. On the contrary, there would follow at once d3, knight c5, and d4. As a rule, border squares are not favorable for knights, but here is an exceptional case when the square h5 is a satisfying one. After e5, knight h5, d4, d5, or d6, in order to force the exchange of the e pawn for black's d pawn, which is only moved once and black does not stand badly. Nimzowitsch then talks about establishing the knight in the center and writes, in general, the knight seeks to establish himself in the center and only exceptionally on the side. He gives an example of maintaining the knight in center, where we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and c3. Where Nimzowitsch writes, a discomforting move which plans an assault on black's center so as to disturb him in his mobilization. Knight f6, d4, e takes on d4, e5, and here knight e4 would be a mistake because of bishop d5. But after e5, the knight can no longer maintain himself of his own strength. So he calls in the aid of the d pawn, thus d5. And if now bishop b3, then knight e4, and the knight establishes himself here. Nimzowitsch continues to give an example of how to maintain a knight in the center in a position we already examined before, where we have e4, e5, d4, e takes on d4, c3, knight f6, e5, knight e4, bishop d3, and d5. Nimzowitsch writes, there follows c takes on d4, and black cannot hug himself with the thought that he is out of the woods. For a tempo gaining attack on the knight is in the air with knight c3. Black, however, develops and attacks at the same time. For instance, by knight c6, threatening white's d-pawn. As such, knight f3, but now bishop g4, threatening yet again to win white's d-pawn. Or again by c5 here, but not by the illogical bishop b4 check because of bishop d2, and black will be forced to a tempo losing exchange. Nimzowitsch continues, it is nevertheless more prudent to hold the center intact, even should we succeed in breaking the shock of the advancing mass of pawns by a proper withdrawal of the knight as outlined previously. Yet the line of play is difficult, and what is more, the pawn roller need not advance at once, but may hold its advance as a continual threat over our heads. Hence, if it can be done without counterbalancing disadvantages, hold the center. Nimzowitsch explains this through an example where we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and bishop e7, the Hungarian defense, which Nimzowitsch comments as being quite playable, although bishop c5 here is certainly more aggressive. But bishop e7 and d4, where Nimzowitsch writes, black will do best to support his center by d6 and thus hold it intact. After d takes on e5, d takes on e5, white's center is immobile. In order to maintain the center, support by a pawn is indicated, since the pawn is the born defender. Of course, not by f6, which would be a horrible mistake for black. The open diagonal c4 to g8 would be decisive. If a piece has to protect any attacked piece or pawn, he feels himself under restraint, whereas in similar circumstance, a pawn would find himself perfectly at ease. In the case under consideration, protection by a piece, that is by bishop f6, would only support the e-pawn, but not the center considered in the abstract or theoretical sense. For instance, d takes on e5, knight takes on e5, knight takes on e5, bishop takes on e5, f4, and the exchange has occurred in accordance with our rule. Exchange followed by a gain of tempo, by f4 winning a tempo over the bishop. Alright, we conclude the third part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system here, and we shall continue onwards in the next one. Shout out to Farraway for subscribing and gifting 3 subscriptions to viewers on my Twitch stream last week. Farraway is a good chess player and has a very nice interactive chess stream of his own. I will post a link to it in the video description. Do check him out. ChessFabregas and RockyMtnChess with a subscription each. Skwerly aka Derek with 2 gifted subscriptions to viewers on my stream. Olipals with 1 gifted subscription. Jacob G99 who was the top chairer with 325 bits. Olipals at second with 300 bits and Gina Rook at third with 112 bits last week. Thank you for the continued support everybody, much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.